but sometimes it's just fun to be mad. Thinking of the trouble we had. Damn, I know this isn't right, but I get stuck inside my mind, still mad.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Yelling so loud you actually throw out your bag.
Hey everyone, welcome back to our Mad series. My name is Ryan, and I'm not sure how this is gonna go. And I know what you're thinking. Great, I'm watching this video and the guy has no idea what he's doing. It's not exactly that. It's more of an emotional, not sure how this is going to go. Because when I was writing this, I could already feel emotion starting to stir inside me. So tears may fall. Why are they gonna fall? Because today we're talking about everyone's favorite topic, and that's anger towards God. You know, your favorite acknowledgement that you're angry at God, this God who created the universe and all the good things that have happened to you are a result of this very generous God. And it may also be the fact that if you've guessed already, this topic hits really close to home. And talking about it takes me right back to this time period where I did wrestle with hostility I was feeling towards this God himself. So anyways, this morning may be a roller coaster of emotions for me.
Hold my hand, let Mama protect you. Please, I'm gonna be just fine.
But trust me when I say this, it's all a good thing. And we're gonna get to that. But before we start, I have a story for you. And what I'm gonna say is a 100% true story. Now, we've been talking about anger for the past month. And the funny thing about anger is that it can come from nowhere. Typically, there is an underlying thing going on, but you can be having a great day, feeling ready to take on the day, and then boom, something happens. Oh! Just a few weeks ago, that exact thing happened to me. While we were leaving church, I was in a great mood. It was a great message. I was hanging out with friends afterwards. And then I was even heading to lunch with my parents. And then something hit me. Now, if you can't tell, yes, that is bird poop. Now, I could have let it ruin my day, and maybe a previous version of myself would have let it ruin my day 100 times over. But let's face it, it's just funny. You know, it's better to just smile and laugh. You know, there are bigger issues in life than to get upset over a little poop. Sometimes in life you get pooped on, but we can get through it because we can always wash our shirt. What's really funny is that this happened again 2 weeks later, but this time it was on my head. And this time I got really angry. I'm just kidding. Now, watch me seamlessly weave this into our topic, but even if I did get angry, even if I let myself get worked up about it, we learned from Brandon in the very first video of this series that anger is not the sin. The emotion of anger is a natural response. We even see it in Jesus himself. Anger is not a sin by itself, but this leads us to the question that many Christians wonder about. Is it wrong to be angry with God? Now let's look at the verse for today. Psalm 22, 1-2. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me? From the words of my groaning, oh my God, I cry by day, but you do not answer, and by night, but I find no rest. Okay, so David was mad at God. Actually, on multiple occasions in the book of Psalms, he vented his frustrations with implicit pleas of why all the time. But maybe you're not like David and you don't pen poetic songs about your frustrations with God. So what do you do with it? That depends on your beliefs and assumptions about God. Dave, our Dave, just taught us last week that our anger, especially our anger towards God, comes about when there is a discrepancy between our expectations and our experiences. That is, anger turned upward. Most of the time, hostility towards God comes from, but it's not limited to, one of the following painful or unexpected life experiences. Any kind of loss, a misfortune, an untimely death, a miscarriage, a broken marriage, a sick child, an economic or job-related crisis, an abuse, an assault, a robbery, a health crisis, an injustice, a natural disaster, or any other traumatic event that you can imagine. Now, when we experience one of these, we tend to feel that we've been given the proverbial rubber stamp of goodness denied from this loving God that we know, and we start to wonder about God's role in the very situation. We find ourselves wondering, was God present? A sense of abandonment. Why was this allowed to happen? A confusion state. Is it okay with me to be mad at God? Am I allowed to feel this way? The thought about being angry at this all-powerful, transcendent being can seem taboo, hence why I'm not sure how I feel about talking about this. It feels strange. It feels irreverent or sacrilegious. Now, however, regardless how we feel, these questions do exist. When crisis hits, people tend to start questioning the very goodness of God. You may say something like, God is good, but what happened to me is not. Did God cause this crisis? Why didn't God prevent it? Why is God always loving towards other people but me? Which is envy. And envy can definitely play a role in our frustration towards this God. No matter the trigger, when we start to push our anger upward, our assumptions about God aren't met, and these questions are as natural as anger itself. In 2010, Baylor University released findings of a religious survey that they later turned into a book called America's Four Gods: What We Say About God and What That Says About Us. This study was based on two questions. The first one they asked was, is God involved or uninvolved in human affairs? The second question is God benevolent and merciful towards humanity, or is God judgmental and critical towards humanity? As you can tell by the book title, they found that America worshiped four distinct types of God. Now, while nearly all the people surveyed said that God is loving, there were significant differences in the way people view God's involvement and God's judgment in the world. Now, 31% believe in an authoritative God who is more engaged and more judgmental. 24% believed in a benevolent God, which is a God who is kind, fair, and generous, and who is more engaged and less judgmental. 16% believe in a critical God, who is less engaged and more judgmental. And finally, 24% believe in a distant God, who is less engaged and less judgmental. Not sure where you fall in all this? How about you ask yourself this? How do you pray to God? When you pray, do you do it from a constant fearful state? Or are you asking things to be fair and just all the time? Or are you just praying for him to come close? He feels too far away. We all have our default settings of God. Depending on the family traditions we grew up on, the churches we attended, and the influential friends and leaders we have in our lives, we form varied beliefs and assumptions about God. Here's an example of how this works. When the complaint against God stems from something that God failed to do or failed to provide, it suggests that the person expects God to be involved in and benevolent towards the situation. They may be angry at God for neglecting to provide protection from the tragedy. Say it with me again, tragedy. For denying something that they expected to receive or failing to heal a disease. Now, this is inconsistent with their expectation of this benevolent God, who is kind, merciful, and compassionate, and protective. A major cognitive discrepancy then exists. So we start playing God. We start thinking we know what's best for ourselves, and our anger turns into bitterness towards God. If we aren't healthy in our anger, if we don't make every effort to reshape it, if we let it fester, it's very easy for our anger to get turned upward. Okay, have I lost you? That's a lot of words basically saying that, yes, we can and do get angry at God. But a lot of it is based on unfair expectations we've put on God. Now let's go back to the verse for today, but this time we're going to go a little bit further and see how David continues his displeasure with God. Just a few verses later, David says this, "Yet you are holy, enthroned on the praises of Israel. In you our fathers trusted. They trusted and you delivered them. To you they cried and were rescued. In you they trusted and were not put to shame. I will tell your name to my brothers. In the midst of the congregation, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him and stand in awe of him. All you offspring of Israel." What a turnaround. What happened to being angry at God, David? Now, all of us who have talked up here have all mentioned that anger is not the sin. It's how we respond to it that can miss the mark. Now, we can turn our anger outward, direct it to the ones around us. We can turn it inward and direct it internally and beat ourselves up. Or we can turn it upward. And I'm going to borrow a line from one of my favorite musicians. So you point your finger at God, you tell him to do his job, to fix your life up because nothing is working. While anger is natural, we should use our anger as a gauge, a check engine light, if you will, about what's really going on. Where is my anger pointed at? Am I sinning in my anger? Am I angry at others? Am I angry at myself? Or am I angry at God? Our anger is a window into our soul. When we respond to a situation with anger, it shines a light on what we value and consider as right and wrong. On the other hand, if something goes that does not produce any feelings of anger, we conclude that it's something that we don't value very much. When a situation turns out differently than the way we think it should have been, it naturally causes the emotional friction in us, and it comes out as frustration, disappointment, annoyance, and anger. I mean, even a child will get mad because he thought he should have gotten dessert. So if we find ourselves being angry with God, it reveals that we think God is unfair or did something wrong to us. So if we are angry with God, we need to be honestly ask ourselves what beliefs we have made about God that are unscriptural, untrue, and unhelpful. Let's look at David again. David voiced his displeasure with God multiple times. But after he was done complaining, he recognized who he was complaining to. He humbled himself and praised God. Now, this isn't an easy thing to do, but it's a game changer when you realize the weight of importance that it carries when dealing with your anger. What we do with our anger is more important than feeling it. While our anger might be more of a subconscious emotional response, how we consciously react determines whether or not it is sin. Nothing good ever comes from anger or any emotion that is either uncontrolled or left bottled up. Now, I'm going to hammer this home yet again. It is not our anger itself that hurts others. It is how we react to the feeling with our words, attitudes, and actions. This is why we've been used this verse in this series a lot. Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity to the devil. Anger becomes sin when we react in a way that is sinful, by cursing God, by becoming bitter, by straying in our relationship with him, by hurting others, or by simply just walking in a way that is disobedient to God's righteousness. However, as we walk more intimately with God, our anger becomes less controlling. Instead of reacting in our anger in a way that is sinful, we recognize it and work to bridle, control, and even let it go. Walking more intimately with God means he can actually take our anger and use it to push back darkness. So if we are angry with God, how much more should we find the root cause in our heart and let it go? I personally do not think that God is upset with us when we are angry with him. I mean, I have 2 little boys, and when they are angry with me, I want to know how they feel. not so I can smite them, but so I can help them understand why I made the decision that I did, and for them to know that I love them. And how much more would God, our Heavenly Father, show mercy to us? We already read how David changed his heart. Not only did he let go of his feelings of anger against God, but he let go of his beliefs about God that were unhelpful, unscriptural, untrue, and wrongly placed. So what does this mean? Well, it may not necessarily be like sinning when we feel angry at God. We must use this emotion to look into our hearts and discover any wrong beliefs, surrender it to God, and then turn and give God praise. For he is always good, and what he does is always with us in mind, for his glory and for our good. Psalm 86:15 says, "But you, O Lord, are a God, merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness." Let our anger drive us to a deeper love. So now that I've delayed long enough, what is my story? Why am I the one doing this video? Why did I volunteer to talk about this subject? Well, the answer is pretty simple. A few years back, I was angry at God, and this is my story of how I used it to push back darkness. Before we get to that, we're going to watch a clip of Toby Mac talking about the loss of his son.
I found out when I was on a tour bus in Canada, and I just fell to my knees. I asked probably 25 times like that day, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are they sure?" I couldn't believe my amazing son was gone.
You have always been a reliable chronicler of your faith and the way that it's uplifted millions of people from the beginning of your career. How did the loss of your son affect that faith?
It rocked it for a while. I didn't walk away. I just kind of made a deal with God. I go, "I'm gonna trust you through this. I'm gonna try." I gave him a chance, is how I say it. That might be a little dishonoring. I don't mean it to be, but I gave him a chance. And in that time, he was kind.
I can relate to that clip. That's exactly how I felt when I found out that Julie and I had lost our baby girl halfway through our first pregnancy. Overwhelming grief and sadness hit me. This was the first type of close loss that I had ever experienced. I remember hitting my knees saying, why, over and over while holding Julie. Confusion doesn't even begin to describe what I was feeling. Things were going so perfect. We were a young married couple, building a community of friends, going to Bible studies, rekindling and forming a new relationship with Jesus, and wham, miscarriage. What the heck, God? Where are you? How could you let this happen? What did I do? And all these things just played on repeat in my mind. Now, I didn't turn my back on God, but it's similar to what Toby Mac, his attitude was towards it. I'm going to give you a shot, God. I'm going to give you a chance to get me back. Now, I knew I was supposed to run to God, but I was upset. I said all the right things to friends and family. I put on a good show of, trusting in the plan, but what I was actually doing was I was bottling it all up. I took all this festering anger and I turned it inward at first, but it silently turned upward without me even really realizing it. This went on for a while, and it basically became like a spiritual paralysis for me. I looked good on the outside, but inside I was just numb. My anger paralyzed any growth and relationship with God. It's like I stopped where I was at in faith and I just coasted by. I mean, Julie and I can recall going back to church when we felt we should go back, and then finding it hard to worship. The words we were singing weren't how we were feeling. And part of the spiritual fog was because it wasn't right to be mad at God. I'm better off being mad at myself because I probably did something to cause this. And until I figure that out, I'm going to take my ball and I'm going to go sit over there. You know, something like a year and a half goes by and I'm still just status quo. Just going through the emotions. I'm angry, but I'm not angry. Still confused and still self-blaming. You know, that is until this one evening, Julie and I decided to sit and watch a movie. Now in this movie, a father grieves the loss of his daughter, yelling and screaming at God, and I'm just sitting there struggling to see through tears. I mean, it's those tears that just drip out of your eyes and down your cheek. And in true fashion, I mean, I don't say anything in the moment, but as soon as the movie ended, I looked over at Julie with tears in my eyes and I lost it. I mean, full on ugly cry into Julie's shoulder. I lost it. Massive amounts of tears, uncontrolled sobbing, snot. I mean, it just hit me. And I said out loud for the first time to Julie that I was mad at God. And I'm not okay that my little girl is gone. Now, I'm not saying that this was one of those moments that everything, as soon as I said everything lifted away like a Disney movie. But it kind of did. In a strange way, it felt so good to say those words out loud and cry out to God. Allowing myself to cry out in anger towards God allowed me to feel his relenting love, his steadfast mercy, and his amazing grace that Scripture talks about so much. I mean, it seems opposite, but humbling myself to the point of admitting my anger towards God actually strengthened my relationship with him. That's why David so often complained to God, but later in the same song is praising him. It's hostility diffused by humility. I'm going to say that again. It's hostility diffused by humility. So what does humility have to do with hostility? 1 Peter 5, verses 6 through 8. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you, casting all your anxieties on him, because he cares for you. Be sober-minded. Be watchful for your adversary, the devil, who prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. When we humble ourselves and we squash down the pride that is holding up our anger, we can recognize that God actually does care, that he shares in our emotions with us. And this realization, this humility, it opens us up to receive the grace of God that's readily available. Humbling ourselves is also the first step in thwarting the devil. Remember that verse in Ephesians? Be angry, but do not sin, because someone is out there waiting for the opportunity. Now, our anger, especially our anger directed at God, is a perfect opportunity for the devil to take hold. I mean, I know it did for me. A young Christian man with a newfound joy for the Lord is now sitting there angry. I mean, I was ripe for the picking, a kingdom worker ready to be disposed of. But thankfully, it didn't work, because I'm sitting here today talking to you. Now I'm doing my best to move the kingdom forward one step at a time, working with God to use my anger to push back the darkness. And I didn't do it alone, because Julie was right there every step of the way. But the funny thing is, we know when we talk about it today that we grew stronger through this. We learned to be more vulnerable with each other because it was us going through it together. ultimately, darkness failed its mission. I'm also so thankful for the family that was there every step of the way. I mean, we were truly surrounded by love and prayer, and even though we were angry and confused, our community, the people around us, did not let the devil grab hold of us. Looking back at it now, I can see the love and care of God through our family and friends. I mean, to sum it all up, yes, I was angry at God. And yes, in my anger, I sinned against God and putting untrue realities and expectations on him. That doesn't mean I was finished, though. It meant that I could finally be honest with God. I don't have to hide my feelings of anger and frustration. I can bring it all to him. In fact, it's welcomed by God. Why? Because God sits on a throne of grace. Of course we should bring our mess to him. Hebrews 4:16 says, "Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." In other words, it's expected. I mean, David's cry reminds me of Jesus' cry on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" We should go to the Father with these emotions, and we should go to him confidently. It doesn't matter what it is, but since we're talking about anger, let's confidently bring our anger to him, just like David did. Bring our anger in a way that knows he will transform it. And speaking from experience, it's so worth it. Now, I thought it would be appropriate to finish with a few lines from one of Toby Mac's songs that he wrote after his bout with anger with God. Now, I'm not a rapper, so bear with me, but this is how it goes. "You made the rain, so when it falls on me, should I complain? Or feel you're calling me? It's all on me to stay and really catch what you're showing. It's my roots that you're growing, 'cause life is more than this moment. You are the light, so when darkness falls, the greatest heights, they never seem so tall. No, not at all. You're right, it's my roots that you're growing. Don't want to miss what you're showing. Ain't no doubt about you. Everywhere that I go, you keep showing up, Lord. You make me want to shout, oh, you're the goodness in my life."